I moved across the city specifically so Marcus wouldn't know where I was. Not because he'd threatened me, he hadn't, not directly. It was subtler than that. The way he'd reference things I'd done when he wasn't there. The way he always seemed to know when I'd been somewhere, spoken to someone, changed something small about my routine. We'd dated for 2 years and by the end of it I'd developed the habit of checking whether he was behind me when I walked anywhere, which is not a habit that belongs in a healthy relationship. I ended it in March and by April I was in a new apartment across town, new building, number unlisted, told only my sister and 2 close friends where I'd gone. The first text came 6 weeks in. We'd had no contact since the breakup and I'd blocked his number, so it arrived from one I didn't recognize. Asterisk hope the new place is treating you well. 4th floor must have a nice view, asterisk I was on the 4th floor. I stood in my kitchen reading it twice and then called my sister and asked if she'd told anyone where I lived. She hadn't. I called both friends. Neither had told anyone. I went to the window and looked down at the street and it was just a street, ordinary and indifferent, nobody looking up. I reported it to the police. An officer took my statement and said that without a direct threat there wasn't much they could do but that they'd note it. He said to document everything. I documented everything. 3 weeks later another text from a different unknown number. New haircut looks good. I'd cut my hair the previous Saturday at a salon 6 blocks from my apartment, a place I'd chosen at random from a search, paid in cash, never been to before. Nobody I knew had seen it yet. I hadn't posted anything. I sat on my bathroom floor with my phone in my hands and thought carefully about what that meant, that he'd been close enough to see me, or that someone who had been close enough had told him. I bought blackout curtains. I varied my routes. I stopped going to the same places twice in a row and started paying attention to faces the way you do when you're afraid, cataloging strangers, looking for repetition. I saw nothing. Nobody following, nobody watching. Just the ordinary texture of a city going about its business while I moved through it alone and frightened. The detail that broke something open was about my neighbor. I'd mentioned to nobody, not my sister, not my friends, that the man across the hall played guitar badly and at inconsiderate hours. I'd thought about it privately, complained about it internally, done nothing about it because confrontation costs energy I didn't have. Then a text arrived that said neighbor still bothering you with the guitar. I read it standing in the hallway outside my own door and felt the particular cold of understanding that the distance I'd put between myself and Marcus had not been distance at all. I went back to the police with everything, all the texts, the timeline, the documented details that couldn't have been guessed. A detective named Holloway took it seriously in a way the first officer hadn't. She made calls while I sat in a waiting area and came back 40 minutes later with a different expression. Marcus had been questioned after a previous partner had filed a complaint, something Holloway described carefully as a pattern of monitoring behavior. There was history. It hadn't been enough before. She thought it might be enough now. What they found in the course of the investigation was a location-sharing app installed on my phone, buried in the settings, disguised under a generic system name, the kind of thing you'd never notice without looking carefully. Installed, the tech told me, during the final weeks of the relationship when Marcus had briefly had access to my phone. It had been running for 5 months. Every place I'd been, every route I'd walked, every salon I'd visited on a random Saturday, all of it visible to him on a map in real time. He was charged. The case moved slowly and then faster and resolved in a way that was better than nothing and less than what I'd wanted. I have a different phone now and a different number and I've moved once more, a smaller place but one I found the right way, cash, no paper trail, nobody told in advance. I checked the new phone settings myself before I used it and had a technician verify it after. I still look over my shoulder when I walk. I still notice every face twice. My sister says I seem better and I tell her I am because it's mostly true and because she worries. What I don't tell her is that I still check my phone settings every week, going through every app, every permission, every process running in the background. Looking for something disguised as something ordinary. It takes 10 minutes and I've found nothing in 8 months, and I will keep doing it anyway, because the thing about being monitored without your knowledge is that it doesn't just take your privacy. She brought cookies the day we moved in. That's how it always starts in these stories, I know, and I even said it to my husband Dan, laughing, as Vera from next door stood on our porch with a tin of shortbread and a smile so warm it almost cancelled out the instinct underneath it. She was mid-60s, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who makes you feel guilty for being suspicious. We invited her in for 10 minutes and she stayed for 45 and left knowing our names, our jobs, that our daughter Sophie was starting middle school, and that I preferred tea to coffee. I chalked it up to loneliness. By the end of the first month I'd stopped chalking things up. Vera mentioned hoping my meeting had gone well, a meeting I'd scheduled that same morning and never mentioned to her. She asked whether Sophie had settled in at school, and when I said she was struggling to make friends, Vera nodded and said she'd noticed Sophie coming home earlier than the other kids. How she'd noticed that through houses and hedges I couldn't say. I told myself retired people observe things. I told myself that for about 2 more weeks. She had a key, we discovered by accident. Dan locked himself out and knocked on her door on a long shot, and she produced it from a kitchen drawer without embarrassment, saying the previous owners had given it to her for emergencies. We changed the locks that weekend. It fixed the mechanism without fixing the feeling. Then things started appearing. A book on the kitchen counter I didn't remember buying. A brand of tea I'd mentioned once showing up in our cabinet. A note tucked under the back doormat thanking us for being good neighbors, in Vera's handwriting, at a door not visible from the street. Our alarm system kept a log of every sensor trigger. I started checking it obsessively. For 6 weeks it was clean. Then on a Thursday when we'd all been out, the log showed the back door opening at 10:22 and again at 11:07. No alarm had sounded. Just a silent record of something opening and closing. The alarm company sent a technician who found nothing wrong and called it a software glitch. I set up a camera myself, hidden behind cookbooks on the kitchen shelf, and let it run for 2 weeks. On the 9th day Vera walked in through the back door at 10:22 a.m. She was wearing her usual cardigan, moving through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had done it many times, opening a cabinet, adjusting something on the counter, then standing in the center of the room with her hands clasped, looking around with an expression that on a different face might have been contentment. She stayed 11 minutes. No alarm sounded when she left. I took the footage to the police that afternoon. A detective watched it twice and his expression changed on the second viewing. When they pulled her background they found small inconsistencies in her records, the kind that only matter when you start looking. The previous owners confirmed they had never given anyone a key. A welfare check on Vera's house turned up a back bedroom used as an office, photographs on a corkboard, handwritten notes, a calendar with our family schedule marked in colored pen going back 4 months. Before we'd moved in. She was charged and the case is working through the system. Someone else has moved into the house next door. I haven't brought him cookies. What nobody could explain was how she opened that door without triggering the sensor. The system was functional, the technician had confirmed it. The detective said some things don't have clean answers, which is what people say when the answer doesn't fit anywhere comfortable. I still check the camera footage every morning and the alarm log every night. I wave at the new neighbor and go inside and lock the door and remind myself that most people are ordinary. But I remember watching her on that small screen, moving through my kitchen with the quiet ease of someone who believed, on some level, that it was hers. The first person to say something out loud was Diane from accounting. She'd been trying to update the staff directory and hit a wall she couldn't explain, no record of a Martin Ellery in the system. No employee ID, no tax file, no start date, no emergency contact. She brought it to HR as a clerical issue, the kind of thing that happens when someone gets hired during a system migration and falls through the cracks. Pauline in HR spent 2 days looking and came back with nothing and an expression she was trying to keep professional. No record anywhere. Not in the old system, not in the archived files, not in payroll going back 7 years. Martin Ellery, as far as the company's records were concerned, did not exist. The problem was that everyone knew him. I'd worked alongside Martin for what felt like 3 years. He sat 2 desks from me in the open plan, arrived each morning around 8:30 with coffee from the place on the corner, and spent his days doing what appeared to be legitimate work: emails, calls, documents. He came to meetings. He weighed in on decisions. He remembered birthdays and asked after people's children by name. When I tried to think back to when he'd started, I found I couldn't locate the memory with any precision. He'd always just been there, the way furniture is there, present enough that you stop registering it. Diane started asking around quietly. Everybody she spoke to had the same experience. They knew Martin, they'd worked with him for years, and not one of them could remember him being hired, could recall a single first day, could point to a project where he'd definitely not been present before a certain date. Nobody had his personal number. Nobody had ever seen him outside the building. When someone mentioned they'd tried to look him up online and found nothing, the room got uncomfortable in a way that rooms get when a shared unease finally has a name. I started paying closer attention. Martin's work was real. I could see him typing, watch him send emails, observe him in conversation. But I noticed that no email from him appeared in my inbox when I searched his name, despite remembering exchanges with him clearly. I asked our IT manager Carl to run a search across the company's mail server. Carl was methodical and thorough and called me back the next afternoon sounding like a man who wanted to attribute what he'd found to a technical error and couldn't quite. No sent or received emails associated with Martin Ellery anywhere in the system. No account. No login history. No access badge record despite Martin using his badge visibly every morning at the front door. We brought it to the building manager who pulled the door access logs. Martin's badge number didn't exist in the system. The logs showed the door opening at the times Martin arrived, the mechanism triggered, the record created, but no associated credential. As if the door had opened on its own. The managing director called a quiet meeting with the 6 of us who'd been asking questions. She was composed and practical and had clearly been hoping for a mundane answer that hadn't materialized. She said she remembered hiring Martin. She was certain of it. She could describe the interview, the offer letter, his first week. But she couldn't produce any of it, and when she tried to remember where she'd put those files, she found the memory went soft at the edges the way dreams do when you try to examine them directly. Someone suggested they speak to Martin directly. Ask him to clarify the paperwork situation, keep it light, frame it as an administrative issue. It seemed like the obvious step, and I'm not sure why none of us had taken it sooner. In retrospect, I think we'd all been unconsciously avoiding it, going around the question rather than to it. We agreed someone would talk to him the next morning. Martin wasn't there the next morning. Or the morning after. His desk was as it always was, his coffee mug, a notepad, a small plant he'd kept alive for what several people estimated was at least 2 years. But Martin didn't come in. Nobody had called in sick on his behalf. There was no absence to record because there was no file to record it in. After a week, the mug and the notepad and the plant were still there. After 2 weeks, Diane moved the plant to the window because it needed more light, and nobody stopped her because there was nobody to stop. After a month, the desk was reassigned to a new hire who asked about the plant and was told it had been there when she arrived, which was true, and that nobody remembered who'd brought it in, which was also true. The new hire's name is Jess. She's been here 4 months now, fits in well, knows everyone. Good with clients. Has a memory for birthdays. I've started trying to remember when exactly Jess started. I have a general sense of it, sometime in autumn, after Martin's desk was cleared.